The moment I stepped through the iron gates of the Calloway estate, I knew I had made either the bravest decision of my life or the worst mistake imaginable. Victoria Calloway's smile tightened the instant she saw me. It wasn't openly rude, not yet, but her eyes moved slowly from my simple navy dress to my worn flats, pausing just long enough to calculate exactly how little I must be worth in her world. I watched her reach a conclusion before I had even said a word. She leaned toward her son, my fiancé Daniel, and whispered something she clearly believed I couldn't hear. "She looks like the catering staff came in through the wrong entrance." And just like that, I understood what kind of evening this was going to be. My name is Lena Hart. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 14 months I have been hiding a secret from the man who asked me to marry him. Not a small secret, not an embarrassing secret, a life-changing one. Daniel believed I was barely getting by. An administrative assistant working in tech, struggling to pay rent, living simply because I had no other choice. What he didn't know was that I earn more in a single month than most people make in a year. I'm a senior software architect at one of the largest technology firms on the West Coast. I hold patents under my name, speak at international conferences, and own stock options worth more than the car Daniel proudly drives. I never actually lied to him. When we first met at a quiet coffee shop 14 months ago, he asked what I did for a living. I told him I worked in tech. He assumed I scheduled meetings and organized calendars, and I never corrected him. Why would I let the man I loved believe I was ordinary? Because the most important person in my life once taught me something I could never forget. My grandmother raised me after my parents died when I was 7. She lived modestly, wore simple clothes, and never spoke about money. Only after she passed away did I discover she'd quietly built a multi-million-dollar business empire. In the letter she left me, she wrote, "A person's true character only appears when they believe you have nothing they need." So when Daniel invited me to meet his family, when he warned me his mother cared deeply about status and first impressions, I made a decision. I would arrive exactly as they expected. Simple, quiet, unimpressive, and I would watch how they treated someone they believed was beneath them. What I didn't know was that I wasn't the only one hiding something that night. And before dinner was over, I would discover that I wasn't being welcomed into a family. I was being used. By the time my car turned onto Silvercrest Drive, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns that looked too flawless to belong to real people. Every house on the street felt staged, like a photograph in a luxury magazine. Large windows, stone facades, quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself loudly because everyone already knew. At the very end of the road stood the Calloway estate. Even from outside the gates, I could tell Daniel hadn't exaggerated. The property stretched farther than I could see, framed by tall hedges and iron fencing detailed with gold accents. A security camera followed my car as I slowed to a stop, and for a brief moment, I considered turning around. Not because I was afraid of meeting his family, because I suddenly realized how much I cared about what they might think of me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Low ponytail, minimal makeup, small gold stud earrings, my grandmother's. The navy dress I had owned for years, elegant but unremarkable. Nothing about me suggested wealth, success, or influence. Perfect. The gates opened with silent precision. As I drove up the winding driveway, memories surfaced uninvited. My grandmother standing in our small kitchen, flour on her hands, telling me that kindness mattered more than appearances. She had lived simply by choice, never by necessity. Back then, I hadn't understood why someone with so much would choose so little. Now I did, because simplicity reveals truth. Daniel was waiting near the front entrance when I parked. He smiled when he saw me, but something flickered across his face before he masked it. A hesitation so brief most people wouldn't notice. I did. His eyes dropped to my dress, then quickly back to my face. "You made it," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The gesture felt slightly rehearsed, like he was aware of invisible observers. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied lightly. The front doors opened before we reached them. Victoria Calloway stood there as if she had been expecting royalty instead of me. Her posture was flawless, shoulders straight, chin lifted just enough to establish hierarchy without appearing obvious. Diamonds rested at her neck, catching the fading light. Her gaze swept over me slowly. Assessment completed. "Lena," she said, offering her hand. "Welcome." Her grip was cool and fleeting, polite, distant. Behind her, the interior of the house glowed with warm lighting, crystal fixtures reflecting off polished marble floors. Everything looked expensive and strangely uncomfortable, as if designed for admiration rather than living. Daniel guided me inside. The air smelled faintly of lilies and something sharper beneath it. Expectation. "This is beautiful," I said honestly. Victoria smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We like to maintain standards." The words sounded harmless, yet somehow corrective. A man rose from the sitting area, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone used to long responsibilities. "My husband, Charles," Victoria said. Charles Calloway shook my hand firmly. Unlike his wife, he actually looked at me, curiosity flickering behind tired eyes. "Nice to meet you, Lena," he said. "Daniel's told us some things." I wondered what version of me Daniel had described. Before I could ask, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. A woman entered, phone in hand, dressed in something that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her dark hair fell perfectly into place as she stopped beside Victoria. "This is my daughter, Vanessa," Victoria said. Vanessa barely glanced up. "Hi." Not hello, not nice to meet you. Just acknowledgement, the social equivalent of a shrug. Daniel shifted beside me, clearing his throat. "Dinner's almost ready." I noticed then how tense his shoulders were. As we moved toward the dining room, I caught sight of framed photographs lining the hallway. Charity galas, award ceremonies, vacations in places I recognized from business conferences. In several pictures, Daniel stood beside a striking woman I had never seen before. Beautiful, elegant, perfectly matched to this world. I slowed slightly, studying one image longer than the others. Victoria noticed. "Oh," she said casually, "that's Alexandra, an old family friend." Her tone suggested the explanation was complete. Something tightened quietly in my chest, though I smiled and nodded. The dining room doors opened. A table set for 6 waited beneath a chandelier large enough to belong in a hotel ballroom. Silverware gleamed under soft light, more forks than any meal could reasonably require. I took my seat carefully, folding my hands in my lap. Across from me, Victoria watched with polite interest, and for the first time that evening, I felt it clearly. The sensation that this dinner wasn't about welcoming me. It was about evaluating me. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the test had already begun. Dinner began with the quiet choreography of practiced wealth. A uniformed server appeared almost soundlessly, placing the first course before us. A delicate soup arranged so carefully it looked more like art than food. I watched Daniel pick up his spoon, waiting half a second before copying him. Not because I didn't know which utensil to use, but because tonight wasn't about proving anything. Tonight was about observing. Victoria noticed anyway. "I imagine formal dinners aren't something you experience very often," she said lightly, folding her napkin across her lap with precise elegance. Her tone carried sympathy sharpened into something else. I smiled politely. "My grandmother always said the company matters more than the table setting." Charles hid what might have been a smile behind his glass. Vanessa, however, let out a quiet laugh. "That's sweet," she said, as though speaking to a child. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. His knee brushed mine under the table, a silent apology he didn't dare say aloud. Victoria continued smoothly. "Daniel tells us you work in technology." "I do." "As support staff?" she asked. There it was, the assumption carefully wrapped as curiosity. "I support development teams," I answered truthfully. Victoria nodded, satisfied, a conclusion confirmed. "How practical," she said. "Every organization needs dependable people behind the scenes." Behind the scenes. I felt the words settle over the table like dust. The second course arrived, giving everyone an excuse to pause. Conversation drifted toward business. Dealership expansions, market pressures, supply shortages. I listened quietly, recognizing terms and financial references they assumed I wouldn't understand. They spoke freely because I was invisible. And invisibility, I had learned long ago, was powerful. Vanessa swirled her wine and glanced at Daniel. "Have you heard from Alexandra lately?" The name landed softly but changed everything. Daniel froze for half a heartbeat before recovering. "Not recently." Victoria sighed nostalgically. "Such a remarkable young woman. Her family has built something truly impressive." She turned toward me. "You would like her, Lena. Very accomplished. Very suitable for our circle." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression calm even as a quiet unease formed inside me. Across the table, Charles cleared his throat. "How did you two meet?" he asked, redirecting the conversation. "A coffee shop," I said. Daniel smiled. "She was working on her laptop for hours. I thought she looked intense. And persistent," I added. He interrupted my debugging session. Charles chuckled. Vanessa checked her phone. Victoria observed us both carefully, as if measuring compatibility against invisible standards. "And your family?" she asked suddenly. "My grandmother raised me," I said. "She passed a few years ago." A brief silence followed. "How unfortunate," Victoria replied, her sympathy sounding rehearsed. "Growing up without proper guidance must have been difficult." The words stung more than I expected. "My grandmother gave me everything I needed," I said quietly. Vanessa leaned forward. "What did she do?" "She was a businesswoman." "Oh?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business?" "Small ventures," I answered. "Technically true." Victoria lost interest almost immediately, shifting conversation back toward investment opportunities. I realized then that in her mind, my story had already been categorized: modest background, limited prospects, temporary presence. Across the table, Daniel remained mostly silent. That hurt more than anything else. I didn't need him to argue. I didn't need a dramatic defense. I just needed him to notice. Dessert arrived, something delicate and impossibly expensive. Conversation softened, but the undercurrent remained. Every question felt like data collection, every smile like evaluation. And slowly, piece by piece, I understood something unsettling. They weren't trying to know me. They were trying to decide whether I belonged. I glanced at Daniel again, hoping to catch reassurance in his expression. Instead, I saw relief whenever the attention moved away from him, as if surviving the evening mattered more than protecting me. A small crack formed in something I hadn't realized was fragile. People often say you learn about a family over time, but sometimes you learn everything in a single meal. As Victoria lifted her glass for a polite toast, I felt the weight of my grandmother's words echo quietly in my mind. A person shows you who they are when they believe you cannot change their future. And sitting there beneath crystal light, surrounded by polite smiles and sharpened kindness, I began to wonder if I was the only one being tested tonight. And if you've ever had a moment where you realized you were being quietly judged without anyone saying it out loud, you already understand why I stayed silent. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the atmosphere at the table had settled into something deceptively calm. Anyone walking into the room would have seen a perfectly pleasant family dinner. Soft laughter, polite conversation, glasses refilled before they were empty. But beneath it, tension moved like an unseen current. Victoria leaned back slightly, studying me with renewed interest, as if she had not yet finished forming her opinion. Vanessa scrolled through her phone between bites, occasionally smirking at something only she could see. Charles remained quiet, watching everyone with the patience of a man accustomed to letting storms pass without intervention. Daniel barely spoke. At first, I told myself he was nervous, that meeting families was always awkward, that he would relax once dinner ended. But the longer I sat there, the more his silence felt intentional. "So, Lena," Victoria said at last, folding her hands together, "what are your ambitions?" The pause before the word ambitions was deliberate. I considered my answer carefully. The truth would sound like arrogance in this room. Modesty sounded like confirmation of their assumptions. "I like building things," I said finally, "solving problems, improving systems." Vanessa laughed softly. "That sounds very humble." I smiled. "It keeps life interesting." Victoria tilted her head. "And long term? Surely you have goals beyond supporting other people's work." The implication was clear. My future, in her mind, depended on Daniel. Before I could respond, Vanessa set down her glass. "Speaking of long-term," she said casually, "I ran into Alexandra last week." There it was again. The name dropped gently, but every person at the table reacted. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Charles looked down at his plate. Victoria's lips curved into something almost satisfied. "Oh," Victoria said, "how is she?" "Thriving," Vanessa replied. "Her family's expansion is going incredibly well. They're opening new distribution channels overseas." She glanced at Daniel. "She asked about you." Daniel forced a small smile. "That was a long time ago." Victoria sighed wistfully. "Some connections are difficult to replace." The words hung in the air. I felt suddenly aware of the photographs I had seen in the hallway. Alexandra standing beside Daniel, perfectly dressed, perfectly matched to this world. Victoria turned toward me. "Alexandra and Daniel dated for several years. Everyone assumed they would marry. There was no kindness in the statement, only comparison." I nodded calmly. "She sounds impressive." Vanessa blinked, clearly expecting discomfort. "She is," Victoria added. "Her family understands how important partnerships can be, personally and professionally." Charles shifted slightly. "Victoria," but she continued smoothly, "marriage is rarely just about feelings. Compatibility matters, shared values, shared standing." Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, that's enough." His voice lacked conviction. Victoria lifted her hands innocently. "I'm simply explaining how families think." Families, not individuals. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not hurt exactly, but clarity. They weren't trying to push me away directly. They were reminding Daniel what he was supposed to choose. The server entered to clear the final plates, offering a brief interruption. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath. Charles stood. "Coffee in the sitting room?" Everyone agreed. As we rose from the table, Vanessa passed close enough to murmur quietly, "Don't take it personally. This world can be difficult to adjust to." I met her gaze. "I'm learning a lot tonight." She smiled faintly, unsure whether I meant it as gratitude or warning. The sitting room felt warmer, softer, designed for conversation rather than evaluation. Firelight flickered across polished surfaces, while Daniel disappeared briefly to speak with his father near the windows. Victoria watched them, then turned to me. "You seem like a nice girl, Lena," she said gently. The sudden kindness felt more unsettling than her earlier criticism. "I care about my son," she continued. "He has responsibilities, expectations. His choices affect more than just himself." "I understand," I said. Her smile deepened slightly. "I hope you do." Across the room, Daniel laughed at something Charles said, relaxed now that attention wasn't focused on us. For the first time that evening, I wondered something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Was Daniel uncomfortable because his family was unfair, or because part of him agreed with them? The thought lingered as Victoria excused herself to speak with staff, and Vanessa stepped outside to take a call. Left alone, I glanced toward the hallway leading deeper into the house. I suddenly needed air, needed distance from polite smiles and hidden meanings. "I'm going to find the restroom," I told Daniel quietly. He pointed down the hall without looking away from his father. "Second door on the left." I nodded and walked away, heels soft against marble floors. The house felt different without conversation filling it. Larger, colder. And as I passed a partially closed door, voices drifted through the gap. Victoria's voice, sharp now, unfiltered. I slowed instinctively. I should have kept walking. I didn't, because in that moment I heard my name. I stopped without meaning to. The hallway was quiet except for the faint hum of distant conversation from the sitting room. Light spilled through the narrow opening of the door beside me, cutting a thin line across the marble floor. Victoria's voice came first, no longer polished, no longer warm. "We need to handle this quickly," Vanessa answered, her tone sharper than before. I honestly thought this was just another phase. Daniel has done this before. My chest tightened. They were talking about me. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to respect privacy, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something in Victoria's voice, urgency mixed with irritation, rooted me in place. "This is different," Victoria said. "He brought her here. That means he's serious." Vanessa scoffed softly. Serious about a girl who looks like she shops at discount stores? A quiet laugh followed. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I stayed still. We can't allow him to make a mistake that affects the family, Victoria continued, especially now. Exactly, Vanessa said. The Castellano partnership is already delicate. If Daniel complicates things... My breath caught. Castellano. Alexandra. Victoria lowered her voice slightly, but the hallway carried every word. The dealerships won't survive another year without that merger. You know the numbers. There was a pause. So what's the plan? Vanessa asked. Victoria exhaled slowly. We let this continue. Temporarily. I felt the world tilt. He proposes, she went on. We make it public. That keeps Alexandra's family attentive while negotiations finish. And then? Vanessa asked. Victoria's answer came calmly, almost thoughtfully. Then we end it. The words landed harder than any insult at dinner. We'll find a reason, she added. Something appropriate. A background issue, financial instability, character concerns. It won't be difficult. My fingers curled against the wall beside me. They weren't just judging me. They were planning me. Vanessa laughed under her breath. Honestly, she seems harmless. Probably grateful Daniel even noticed her. Harmless. Grateful. A placeholder, Vanessa continued. That's all she is. The word echoed inside my chest. Placeholder. Victoria didn't disagree. My only concern, she said, is that Daniel might grow attached. Oh, please, Vanessa replied. He knows what's expected. Alexandra is the future. This girl is just convenient. I closed my eyes. Somewhere far away, I heard laughter from the sitting room. Daniel's voice among them. Victoria spoke again, quieter now. We announce the engagement soon. Public commitment gives us control. After that, we guide things where they need to go. And if she resists? Victoria's answer was cold. She won't. Girls like her never do. Silence followed. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding so loudly I was certain they would hear it through the door. My hands trembled, not with sadness. Not yet. But with something sharper. Understanding. Every smile at dinner, every carefully worded question, every mention of Alexandra. It hadn't been subtle cruelty. It had been strategy. I forced myself to keep walking down the hallway, each step steady despite the storm inside me. The bathroom door appeared ahead, and I slipped inside, locking it quietly behind me. For several seconds, I simply stood there staring at my reflection. Same navy dress, same calm expression, but something had changed behind my eyes. I turned on the faucet and let cold water run over my wrists, grounding myself. Placeholder. The word replayed again and again. I thought about Daniel. The way he laughed with me at coffee shops, the nights he stayed up listening to my stories, the warmth in his voice when he said he admired how uncomplicated I was. Had any of that been real? Or had I simply been convenient? A strange calm settled over me then. Not denial, not heartbreak, clarity. I had come tonight to learn who his family truly was, and now I knew. The more unsettling realization followed immediately after. Daniel wasn't just surrounded by this plan, he was part of it. I dried my hands slowly, straightened my shoulders, and adjusted my earrings. My grandmother's earrings. Her voice echoed gently in my memory. When someone underestimates you, they give you an advantage. I took one steady breath, then another. By the time I unlocked the door and stepped back into the hallway, my expression was composed again. No one in the sitting room would see what had just broken, or what had just begun forming in its place, because the dinner was no longer a test. It was the beginning of a game, and for the first time that night, I understood the rules. When I returned to the sitting room, nothing looked different. The fire still flickered softly in the marble fireplace. Crystal glasses caught the warm light. Daniel stood near the windows with his father, laughing at something that seemed entirely ordinary. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if the conversation in the hallway had somehow belonged to another reality. Then Victoria looked at me. Her smile appeared instantly, warm, welcoming, perfectly controlled. And I knew I hadn't imagined a single word. "There you are," she said. We were beginning to worry. "I got a little turned around," I replied lightly, taking the seat Daniel pulled out for me. His hand rested briefly at my back, gentle and familiar. Once that touch would have reassured me. Now it felt strangely distant, like comfort offered out of habit rather than intention. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes, blue, open, concerned. And suddenly I realized something unsettling. If he was lying, he was very good at it. "I'm fine," I said. Across the room, Vanessa watched us with faint amusement, as though observing a scene she already knew the ending to. Coffee arrived, followed by casual conversation about travel plans and upcoming events. Victoria described a charity gala scheduled for the following month, carefully mentioning influential names and exclusive guest lists. Every detail felt deliberate. Every word reminded me that their world operated on alliances, appearances, and calculated relationships. I listened politely, responding when spoken to, smiling when expected. Inside, however, my thoughts moved quickly, rearranging everything I believed about the evening. They planned to control the narrative. They believed I would quietly accept whatever role they assigned me. They believed I didn't understand. And most importantly, they believed I had no power. Daniel squeezed my hand beneath the table. "I'm glad tonight went well," he murmured. The words almost made me laugh. "Well," I repeated softly. He smiled, relieved, unaware of the irony. Victoria set down her cup. "Daniel tells us you two have been discussing the future." There it was again, direction disguised as conversation. "We've talked," Daniel said cautiously. Vanessa leaned forward. "It must be exciting," she said to me, "joining a family like ours." The phrasing lingered. Joining us. Not becoming equal and being absorbed. "It's a big step," I answered carefully. Victoria nodded approvingly. "Marriage always is." For a brief second, silence settled over the room. Something unspoken passed between mother and son. Expectation, pressure, inevitability. I watched Daniel closely. He avoided his mother's eyes. That told me more than anything else. Charles stood abruptly, stretching slightly. "Another drink, anyone?" The tension broke just enough for conversation to scatter again. Vanessa moved toward the bar area, scrolling through her phone. Victoria excused herself to speak with a staff member near the entrance. Daniel finally relaxed beside me. "They like you," he said quietly. I turned toward him slowly. "Do they?" He hesitated. "My mom just takes time." I studied his face, searching for signs. Guilt, awareness, hesitation. If he knew about the plan, he hid it well. Or maybe he truly believed he was protecting everyone by staying silent. That possibility hurt more than deliberate cruelty. "I know tonight was a lot," he continued, "but once they get to know you, things will be easier." Easier? The word echoed strangely. I wondered what version of the future he imagined. One where I disappeared quietly when negotiations were finished. Or one where he never questioned the cost of his family's approval. Before I could respond, Victoria returned, her expression brighter than before. "Well," she announced, clapping her hands lightly, "this has been lovely. We should do this again soon." Agreement followed automatically. Coats were brought, goodbyes exchanged. At the front entrance, Victoria kissed Daniel's cheek and turned to me with practiced warmth. "Drive safely, Lena. Family evenings can be overwhelming at first." I smiled. "Thank you for having me." Vanessa added casually, "You handled yourself better than I expected." I wasn't sure whether it was meant as praise. Outside, the night air felt cooler, clearer. Daniel walked me to my car, slipping his hands into his pockets as we stopped beside it. He looked nervous now. "Seriously," he said, "I think tonight went great." I studied him under the soft driveway lights. For one fragile moment, I almost told him everything. About the hallway, the conversation, the word placeholder still echoing in my mind. Instead, I asked quietly, "Daniel, are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Of course," he said quickly. "Why wouldn't I be?" I nodded slowly, because I suddenly understood something important. He didn't see the trap forming around either of us, but I did. He leaned in and kissed me goodnight, warm and familiar, as if nothing had changed. I waited until his figure disappeared behind the closing gates before starting the engine. As my car rolled down the long driveway, one thought settled firmly into place. I hadn't lost anything tonight. I had gained information, and information, my grandmother used to say, was the strongest form of protection. By the time I reached the main road, my decision was already made. I wasn't going to walk away. Not yet. The morning after dinner felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight filtered through my apartment windows, landing across the same small kitchen table where I had spent countless mornings drinking coffee before work. Outside, traffic moved as usual. People hurried to offices, meetings, routines, untouched by the quiet shift that had taken place in my life the night before. It almost made everything feel unreal until I remembered the word, placeholder. I opened my laptop. If there was one thing years in software architecture had taught me, it was this: systems never lie. People might manipulate stories, hide intentions, or rewrite memories, but data always left patterns behind, and patterns were my specialty. I began with public records, Callaway Automotive Group. The company looked stable at first glance. Multiple dealership locations, steady branding, decades of family ownership, but surface appearances rarely told the real story. Within minutes, small inconsistencies started appearing: debt filings, refinanced loans, inventory delays. I leaned closer to the screen, scrolling through financial disclosures most people would never bother reading. Expansion loans taken during peak market years, aggressive growth projections that suddenly stopped 2 years ago, supplier disputes quietly settled out of court, not collapse, but strain. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. They weren't thriving. They were surviving. I sat back slowly, absorbing the implication. Victoria's urgency suddenly made perfect sense. The Castellano partnership wasn't strategic. It was necessary. Without outside investment, the company would eventually fail. And Alexandra's family controlled exactly what the Callaways needed: international distribution channels and liquidity, which meant Daniel's future marriage wasn't just personal, it was leverage. A cold heaviness settled in my chest. I opened another file, searching older reports, cross-referencing names connected to board decisions. One name appeared repeatedly beside unusual expense patterns: Vanessa Callaway. At first, it looked harmless: executive reimbursements, travel costs, promotional spending. But the amounts were inconsistent, growing larger each year, while company profits declined. I created a quick comparison model. Numbers aligned, too perfectly. Money moving outward while the company tightened internally. I stared at the screen, realization forming slowly. Someone inside the company was bleeding it quietly. And they either hadn't noticed or hadn't wanted to. My phone buzzed beside the laptop. Daniel, good morning. Still thinking about last night. I miss you already. I read the message twice. Once, it would have made me smile. Now it felt like reading lines from a script whose ending I already knew. I typed back carefully, "Busy morning, talk later." 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared. I set the phone aside and returned to the data. Hours passed unnoticed. Coffee grew cold beside me as documents stacked into folders. Financial reports, transaction summaries, archived business articles. Piece by piece, a hidden narrative emerged. The Callaways weren't powerful players controlling outcomes. They were reacting to pressure. Desperation explained cruelty far better than arrogance ever could. Around noon, I paused, rubbing tired eyes. A quiet thought surfaced then, unexpected and uncomfortable. If I had walked away last night, none of this would matter to me. I could close the laptop, block Daniel's number, return to a peaceful life untouched by their problems. But something deeper kept me sitting there. Not revenge, not anger, truth. They had decided who I was without knowing me, and Daniel had allowed it. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the sky. I watched them for a moment, remembering my grandmother's voice again. Calm, patient, certain. When people underestimate you, listen carefully. They reveal more than they intend. I reopened the laptop, because now I wasn't just learning about their plans. I was learning their weaknesses, and knowledge, once gained, changed everything. If you've ever kept digging for answers even when part of you wished you wouldn't find them, you already know why I couldn't stop. By late afternoon, one thing had become undeniable. The Callaway family believed they were orchestrating the future, but they were standing on far more fragile ground than they realized. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt something unexpected replace hurt. Control. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost surreal. On the surface, nothing had changed. Daniel called every morning. We met for dinner twice a week. He held my hand in public, laughed at my jokes, and spoke about the future as if it were already written. Vacations we might take, apartments we might share, plans that sounded warm and ordinary. If I hadn't heard that conversation in the hallway, I might have believed everything was real. But once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. And I had started noticing patterns everywhere. I watched him more carefully now, not suspiciously, just attentively. The way he checked his phone face down on tables, the way certain messages made his expression tighten before he quickly smiled again, the way conversations about his family always ended with him changing the subject. Small things, individually meaningless, together unmistakable. One evening, we met at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to love because no one recognized him there. Candlelight reflected softly against the windows, while rain tapped gently outside. "You've been distant," Daniel said halfway through dinner. I looked up. "Have I?" "A little," he admitted. "Did my mom say something that upset you?" The question almost made me laugh. He still believed the problem was misunderstanding, not intention. "She's protective," I said carefully. He exhaled in relief. "Yeah, she just worries about appearances." Appearances. The word lingered between us. "And you?" I asked softly. "Do appearances matter to you?" Daniel hesitated. "In my world, they kind of have to." There it was. Honesty disguised as practicality. He reached across the table, taking my hand. "But you're different. That's why I like being with you. You make things feel simple. Simple." I wondered if he realized how often he used that word to describe me. Not strong, not intelligent, not equal. Simple. I smiled faintly and squeezed his hand back, though something inside me pulled away. Later that night, as we walked toward the parking lot, his phone vibrated again. He glanced down instinctively before turning the screen away. Work message, probably. Except his expression softened in a way work never caused. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just family stuff." He slipped the phone into his pocket without replying. The lie was small, almost gentle, and that made it worse. A few days later, I told him I would be working late and drove home earlier than expected. On impulse, one I didn't fully understand, I took a different route through the city. That was when I saw him. Daniel sat inside a restaurant near the waterfront, visible through wide glass windows. Across from him sat a woman I recognized instantly from photographs lining the Callaway hallway. Alexandra. She leaned forward as she spoke, smiling warmly. Daniel laughed, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. At one point, he reached across the table, brushing something from her hand. The gesture was familiar, intimate, unquestioned. I stayed in my car longer than I meant to, watching rain blur the windshield. Strangely, I didn't feel shock, only confirmation. I pulled out my phone and took a single photograph through the glass, not for revenge. For clarity, because denial disappears when proof exists. Driving home afterward, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't cruel. He wasn't calculating like his mother or openly dismissive like Vanessa. He was weaker than that. He wanted everyone happy. His family, Alexandra, me, even if maintaining that illusion required dishonesty. And weakness, I understood now, could hurt just as deeply as cruelty. That night he called. "Miss you," he said softly. "Long day." I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "Mine too." We spoke for several minutes about ordinary things, work frustrations, weekend plans, trivial details that once made me feel connected to him. Now they sounded like echoes. Before hanging up, he added, "I'm really glad you're in my life, Lena." I believed he meant it. That was the tragedy. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment, the photograph open on my screen. Rain continued tapping against the windows, steady and patient. My grandmother used to say that love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades the moment you see someone clearly for the first time. And that night, looking at Daniel's smiling face beside another woman, I finally understood who he truly was. Not the man I imagined, not the man I hoped for. Just a man who would never choose me when choosing became difficult. For the first time since the dinner, the pain arrived fully. But beneath it, something stronger began to grow. Resolve. Pain, I discovered, doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles quietly beside you, patient and steady, until clarity replaces confusion. The morning after I saw Daniel with Alexandra, I woke earlier than usual. The city outside my window was still half asleep, streets washed clean by overnight rain. For several minutes, I simply sat at the edge of my bed, letting reality settle into place. I wasn't shocked anymore. I wasn't even angry. I understood. Daniel wanted comfort without consequence. His family wanted control without resistance. And they all believed I would eventually disappear without creating complications. They believed wrong. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and reviewed the folders I'd been building over the past weeks. Financial reports, transaction records, archived interviews, notes connecting conversations to documented facts. What had begun as curiosity was becoming structure. A plan didn't appear all at once. It formed gradually, the way solutions often did when solving complex systems. Identify pressure points, observe dependencies, wait for timing. The Callaways' greatest strength was reputation, which meant reputation was also their greatest weakness. My phone buzzed. Daniel, Mom wants to host an engagement party soon. Big one. She's excited. I stared at the message. Engagement party. Of course. Public commitment. Social pressure. Exactly what Victoria had described behind that closed door. I typed back slowly. That sounds nice. 3 dots appeared immediately. I think it'll help everyone see how serious we are, he added. I almost admired the irony. Later that afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Lena Hart? An older male voice asked. Yes. This is Richard Bennett. We met briefly at the Callaway dinner. I remembered him instantly. The quiet guest who had watched more than he spoke. I hope I'm not intruding, he continued. I had a feeling you might want to talk. There was something careful in his tone, as though he already knew more than he was saying. We agreed to meet at a small cafe the next morning. Richard arrived early, dressed simply, silver hair neatly combed. Up close, his sharp eyes missed nothing. I've known the Callaways a long time, he said after we ordered coffee. Long enough to recognize patterns. I didn't interrupt. They've made enemies, he added calmly. Not illegal decisions, just unethical ones. Enough people have been waiting for consequences. He studied my expression. You heard something that night, didn't you? I held his gaze for a moment before answering. Yes. He nodded as if confirming a theory. They underestimate people, he said. It's a habit. I almost smiled. We spoke for nearly an hour. Richard shared pieces of history. Business deals pushed too far, partners quietly forced out, reputations protected through influence rather than integrity. Nothing dramatic, just enough to explain why resentment followed the Callaway name in certain circles. When I mentioned irregularities in the company finances, his eyebrows lifted. You noticed that quickly, he said. I work with systems, I replied. Broken ones leave traces. Richard leaned back thoughtfully. If everything you suspect is true, the timing of that engagement party is unfortunate for them. The idea settled fully then. Not revenge. Exposure. Truth placed where it could no longer be ignored. Driving home afterward, I felt strangely calm. For weeks I had reacted, listening, observing, processing. Now, for the first time, I was choosing direction. That evening, Daniel called again, excited. You're going to love this, he said. Mom's inviting everyone important, business partners, investors, people who matter. People who matter. I wondered how he would define that phrase after the night to come. I'll be there, I said softly. After we hung up, I opened my closet and looked past the modest clothes I usually wore, toward another section. Garments I had deliberately ignored for months. Elegant, precise, unmistakably expensive. For 14 months, I had hidden parts of myself to learn the truth about someone else. Soon I would stop hiding. My grandmother used to say timing was everything. Truth spoken too early is dismissed. Truth revealed at the right moment changes everything. The engagement party would be that moment. And as I closed the closet door, one realization settled firmly in my mind. The Callaways believed they were preparing a celebration. They had no idea they were preparing a stage. The Callaway estate looked different the night of the engagement party. White tents stretched across the manicured lawn, glowing under soft golden lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary frames, casting reflections across polished glass tables. A string quartet played near the fountain, their music floating through the evening air with effortless elegance. Victoria Calloway had not planned a celebration. She had planned a statement. Luxury cars lined the long driveway. Sleek black sedans, imported sports models, vehicles chosen as carefully as the guests stepping out of them. Laughter drifted across the lawn, mingling with the soft clinking of champagne glasses. I parked my old car near the end of the valet line. The attendant hesitated when I handed him the keys, glancing briefly between me and the vehicle as if trying to resolve a contradiction. I smiled politely and thanked him before walking toward the entrance. Each step felt strangely calm. For weeks I had imagined this moment, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. Tonight wasn't about proving I was better than them. It was about allowing the truth to exist where everyone could see it. Inside the main tent, conversations paused as I entered. Not dramatically, just enough. I understood why immediately. Tonight I wasn't wearing the navy dress. The emerald gown fit perfectly, tailored years earlier for an industry gala I had nearly skipped. My grandmother's diamond pendant rested lightly against my collarbone, subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with real craftsmanship. My hair fell loose around my shoulders, and for the first time since meeting Daniel, I wasn't trying to look smaller than I was. I looked like myself. Whispers followed quietly as I moved through the crowd. Confusion first, recognition second. Daniel spotted me near the entrance. His expression shifted instantly from relief to disbelief. "Lena," he said, walking toward me, "you look different." "I feel different," I replied gently. His eyes moved from my dress to the pendant, then back to my face as if searching for explanation. Before he could ask, Charles approached, greeting arriving guests. He stopped short when he saw me. "Good evening," I said warmly. He blinked once, clearly recalculating something. "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you." Across the tent, Victoria turned. The transformation on her face unfolded slowly. Recognition, confusion, and finally something sharper. Her gaze moved carefully over every detail, measuring value the way she always had. Only this time, the conclusion unsettled her. She approached with practiced composure. "Lena," she said, voice perfectly controlled. "What a surprise." "I thought tonight deserved something special," I answered. Vanessa appeared beside her moments later, eyes narrowing slightly. "That dress," she said sweetly, "is it rented?" I met her gaze calmly. "No." I added the designer's name softly. The effect was immediate. Vanessa's smile faltered, recognition flashing across her face before she masked it. Daniel looked between us, completely lost. Guests nearby had begun whispering more openly now. Several faces turned toward me with curiosity rather than dismissal. A woman from an investment firm studied my pendant with unmistakable interest. The narrative was shifting, and Victoria felt it. "Daniel," she said quickly, "your father needs you." He hesitated, clearly wanting answers, but followed her instruction automatically. I watched him go, realizing how deeply habit controlled him. Richard Bennett appeared beside me moments later, offering a quiet nod. "Perfect timing," he murmured. "You said they value appearances," I replied softly. He smiled faintly. "They built everything on them." Across the lawn, guests continued arriving. Conversations grew louder, speculation spreading through the crowd like ripples across water. People were noticing. Not just my appearance. The inconsistency between what they had been told and what they were seeing. Exactly as planned. Daniel returned minutes later, anxiety visible now. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. "Later," I said gently. "We have a party to attend." I slipped my arm through his and guided him toward a group of business guests near the center of the tent. As introductions began, I watched recognition dawn one conversation at a time. Company names mentioned, professional circles overlapping, connections forming where none were expected. Daniel's confusion deepened with every exchange. Behind him, Victoria watched carefully, her composure cracking at the edges. For the first time since I met her, she wasn't controlling the room. She was reacting to it. The music softened as staff prepared the stage for speeches. Glasses were refilled, guests gathered closer, sensing an important moment approaching. Victoria moved toward the microphone with renewed determination. She still believed this evening belonged to her. And as I accepted a glass of champagne and waited, I realized something quietly satisfying. She was right. It did belong to her, just not in the way she expected. The music faded as Victoria stepped onto the small stage at the center of the tent. Conversations softened instantly. Glasses paused mid-air. The practiced rhythm of high society gatherings took over, attention shifting automatically toward whoever held the microphone. Victoria smiled, radiant and composed, every inch the perfect hostess. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began warmly. "This evening means so much to our family. Celebrating Daniel's engagement marks the beginning of a beautiful new chapter." Polite applause followed. Daniel stood beside me, tense, his hand resting uncertainly at my back. I could feel his confusion growing with every passing minute. He still didn't understand why the room felt different, why guests were watching me as closely as they watched his mother. Victoria continued, her voice flowing smoothly. "Family has always been the foundation of everything we've built. Strong partnerships, shared values, and trust ensure success, both in business and in life." I noticed several business guests exchange subtle glances. Richard stood near the back, calm and observant. Victoria turned toward Daniel. "My son has found someone special," she said. "A young woman who, we believe, will become a wonderful addition to the Calloway legacy." She extended her hand toward me. "Lena, dear, would you join us?" Every eye followed as I walked toward the stage. The night air felt cool against my skin, but my steps were steady. Weeks of uncertainty, disappointment, and quiet preparation narrowed into this single moment. Daniel squeezed my hand when I reached him. "What's going on?" he whispered. "You'll understand," I said softly. Victoria handed me the microphone with a smile that didn't quite hide her unease. "I'm sure Lena would like to say a few words," she added. I looked out over the crowd. Investors, partners, friends, strangers, all waiting for something pleasant and predictable. Instead, I took a slow breath. "Thank you," I began. "I want to start by saying how grateful I am for the welcome I received when I first came here." Victoria's smile returned cautiously. "I arrived wearing a simple dress," I continued, my voice calm, "because I wanted to understand something important." A faint ripple moved through the audience. "My grandmother once told me that people reveal their true character when they believe you have nothing they need." Victoria's expression froze. I allowed the Calloway family to believe I was ordinary, someone without influence, someone replaceable. Daniel's grip tightened. "What I discovered," I said gently, "was enlightening. I described the dinner, the comparisons, the quiet dismissals, the assumptions made before anyone truly knew me. Murmurs spread through the crowd as recognition dawned." Then I paused. "And later that night," I added, "I overheard a conversation." Victoria stepped forward. "Lena," I continued calmly, "I learned I was meant to be temporary, a public engagement designed to support a business merger, a placeholder until a more suitable match could be arranged." Gasps moved through the tent. Daniel stared at me, pale. "What?" I met his eyes briefly before turning back to the crowd. "I also learned the Calloway Company is facing serious financial instability." Charles lowered his head slowly. "And that internal financial irregularities exist, patterns that may soon attract attention from people who investigate such things professionally." Across the lawn, several guests exchanged shocked whispers. Richard stepped forward slightly, confirming without speaking. Victoria's composure shattered. "This is outrageous!" "All of this," I said calmly, "is documented." Silence followed. I reached up and removed the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond caught the light. Beautiful at a distance, flawed up close. "I won't be marrying Daniel," I said softly. His voice broke. "Lena, please!" "I gave you chances to be honest," I replied gently. "You chose comfort instead." I placed the ring in his hand. "This engagement was never real," I continued, turning back toward the audience. "But the lesson was." I lifted my chin slightly. "My name is Lena Hart. I am a senior software architect, and I chose to live simply because I wanted to know whether people valued character more than status." The crowd remained completely silent. "Tonight," I said, "I received my answer." I set the microphone down. No dramatic exit, no raised voice, just truth left standing in open air. As I walked through the parted crowd, whispers followed. Not judgment, but realization. Behind me, chaos began quietly. Urgent conversations, shaken reputations, alliances reconsidered. Outside the tent, cool night air filled my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. Richard joined me near the fountain. "You handled that with remarkable restraint," he said. "I didn't want revenge," I answered. "Just honesty." He nodded. I walked toward the valet stand, reclaiming my old car while voices echoed faintly behind me. As I drove away, the estate lights faded in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And if this story reminds you that self-respect sometimes begins the moment you stop asking to be chosen, then you already understand why walking away was the real ending.